Have you ever sat in a crowded room, a place where laughter ripples around you like gentle waves, and yet felt as though you were watching it all from behind a pane of glass? Imagine those moments when your mind notices every nuance, the way a friend's smile flickers too quickly to the left, the subtle impatience in someone's tone, the threads of thought trailing behind each exchange. Many of us have brains that connect dots others don't see, building bridges between ideas with ease, and yet, when the sun sets and the quiet settles in, there's a heaviness that refuses to leave. People may rely on your way of thinking, trust your insights, but a part of you wonders why a bright, thoughtful mind can be accompanied by an ache that seems to live deep in your chest. There's a paradox here, a hidden tension between thinking deeply and happiness that isn't often spoken about. It can feel like standing on a mountain, seeing farther than others, while feeling the chill of the wind more acutely. Have you ever felt this strange mix of clarity and sadness? This sense that being attuned to the world somehow makes it sharper and more piercing? You're not alone in feeling that a sharp mind is both a gift and a weight. Late at night, when the world is quiet and nothing demands your attention, perhaps your thoughts turn inward. The achievements on your desk and the responsibilities on your shoulders don't stop the loop of questions in your mind. You might remember that offhand comment from a colleague this morning, replaying it from every angle, analyzing the tone, the possible implications. A mind trained to solve complex problems now turns that capacity towards itself. Sleep becomes elusive as your thoughts spin on, examining past decisions, future possibilities, and imaginary consequences. Being good at figuring things out can make problem-solving feel like second nature, but it can also turn ordinary events into tangled webs of analysis. In those quiet hours, there's a loneliness that doesn't come from a lack of company, but from feeling misunderstood. People may admire the way you think, but rarely see the burden it sometimes brings. They might not notice that you often bite back what you want to say in order to avoid standing out, or the way you deliberately avoid answering too quickly to give others time to speak. You may shrink so others don't feel small beside you, only to feel smaller yourself for doing so. There's a strange tension between your capacity to understand and the yearning to connect, and it can lead to a deep, silent hurt. Think about the countless times you've held yourself to impossible standards. You know you're capable of meaningful things, so you set goals that hover just beyond reach. When you fall short, even slightly, disappointment settles over you like a thick fog. Your inner voice whispers that you should have done better, been quicker, got it right the first time. The praise others offer feels hollow because you're acutely aware of how far you are from the perfection you imagined. This isn't vanity, but rather the flip side of self-awareness. You see potential outcomes with such clarity that anything less feels like failure. And in that constant striving, you may find yourself disconnected from small joys. Achieving something that once would have thrilled you now feels routine, because your mind has already projected 10 steps ahead. When you finish a project at work, there's a brief spike of satisfaction, followed quickly by the nagging question, what next? When success becomes an expectation rather than an experience, it can sap the pleasure from your achievements. It becomes easy to believe that happiness lies in the next accomplishment, the next solved problem, never noticing that the finish line keeps shifting. If you've ever asked yourself why you can't simply rest in your achievements or why your mind feels trapped in constant striving, you are touching upon an invisible weight that many thoughtful people carry. Underneath these experiences lurks a set of psychological patterns that often go unnoticed. One of them is the tendency to overthink and ruminate. When your mind is wired to explore possibilities, it can become difficult to let go of thoughts, even when they're distressing. A critical remark from a boss or a hint of dissatisfaction from a partner doesn't just sting, It prompts a cascade of analyses, scenarios, and strategies. Your brain might be building contingency plans, mapping out every potential outcome. This skill is invaluable when you're designing a project or solving a complex problem. But when turned inward, it can amplify worry. You might find yourself replaying a conversation, emphasizing the way someone looked away at a particular moment, wondering what it meant, how you should respond, and what it says about you. This rumination can be exhausting, leaving you drained and more prone to depressive moods. The same mind that often protects you can morph into a critic that refuses to rest. Another pattern that often accompanies deep thinking is heightened sensitivity, both to external stimuli and to emotional nuances. Perhaps you notice every noise, every flicker of light, every change in mood around you. This heightened awareness can be a tremendous strength, enabling you to read a room quickly or pick up subtle cues others miss. Yet it also means that loud environments or harsh lighting can feel overwhelming, and a harsh comment can cut deeper than most realize. Your nervous system may respond more strongly to stressors, and this overexcitability can trigger a physical stress response. Heart rate quickens, muscles tense, and cortisol floods your body because your brain perceives threat not just from major events, but from subtle signals. Over time, this can contribute to feelings of chronic stress, anxiety, and eventually depression. It's not that being smart causes these conditions. Rather, the way your brain processes information can make you more susceptible to certain emotional patterns. Recognizing this sensitivity as part of who you are, not a flaw, can be the first step in responding to it with compassion rather than self-criticism. Social isolation is another hidden contributor. People who think deeply often describe feeling like outsiders from an early age. Perhaps you were praised for being bright, but struggled to fit in with your peers. Your interests may have been different, your humor more abstract, your questions more complex. The joy of exploring ideas can sometimes come at the expense of social connection. If you've ever been misunderstood when sharing an idea, if your excitement about a book or a piece of music was met with blank stares, you might have learned to keep those parts of yourself hidden. Over time, this can lead to a sense of loneliness, not because you're alone, but because you feel unseen. You might find yourself withdrawing from social situations that once energized you, thinking it's easier to be alone than to feel alone in a crowd. This withdrawal can feed depression, as isolation removes you from the very connections that could support you. Even when you long for meaningful relationships, the fear of being misunderstood can hold you back. And when relationships don't unfold with the depth you crave, you may internalize it as a personal failing rather than a reflection of compatibility. There's also the weight of expectation, both internal and external. Being someone others regard as capable often means people expect you to have the answers. Teachers, colleagues, family members may look to you for solutions, advice, leadership. While this may feel affirming at times, it can also be burdensome. You might feel responsible for solving problems that aren't yours, or for making choices that have significant consequences. The pressure to consistently perform at a high level can erode your sense of freedom. Internally, you might believe that if you're not excelling, you're wasting your potential, or worse, disappointing those who believe in you. This pressure can lead to perfectionism, where any minor misstep feels catastrophic. And perfectionism is a well-worn path to burnout and depression, because no human can meet standards that leave no room for mistakes. If you recognize this pressure in your own life, consider how it shapes your self-talk and how it might be driving you toward unattainable goals rather than sustainable growth. It's easy to think these struggles are personal flaws, but they have roots in how our brains work. Recent research into the neurobiology of thinking offers clues. Scientists have observed that that some people have brains that are wired differently, showing stronger connections within certain regions, particularly in areas linked to planning and problem solving. These efficient networks can filter out distractions, allowing for intense focus and rapid idea generation. At the same time, the neural pathways associated with self-referential thought, those networks that light up when you're daydreaming or reflecting, can be highly active. This means your brain might be adept at both external problem solving and internal reflection, sometimes switching between the two rapidly. While this can be a strength, it can also mean that the same circuits you use to tackle challenges are engaged when you reflect on your own experiences, making self-critique more intense. Another neuroscientific finding relates to sensory processing. Some people display heightened sensitivity to sensory information, processing input at a deeper level and noticing subtle differences in sound, light, and texture. This heightened awareness can foster creativity and insight, but it can also lead to sensory overload. When your environment is noisy, bright, or chaotic, your brain may struggle to filter out the unnecessary stimulation. This constant influx of information can make you feel on edge or exhausted. It's not simply that you're too sensitive. Your brain is literally taking in and analyzing more data. When this heightened sensitivity intersects with emotional life, it can amplify feelings. Criticism might hit harder, and you may feel joy more intensely, but also sadness more deeply. This depth of feeling is part of your human experience. Yet, without understanding its source, it's easy to label yourself as overly emotional or weak. Researchers have also explored the concept of overexcitabilities, intense reactions to stimuli that can occur in those who think and feel deeply. Psychological overexcitability involves a tendency to ruminate and worry. Your brain might latch onto a thought and spiral through every possible scenario. Physiological overexcitability, meanwhile, refers to the body's heightened stress response. An adverse email, a minor disagreement, or even a loud noise can trigger your fight or flight system. The interplay of these two forms of overexcitability creates what some scientists call the hyperbrain/hyperbody cycle. When your mind overanalyzes a situation, your body responds as if there is a threat, releasing stress hormones. This physical reaction, in turn, intensifies your mental worry, creating a feedback loop that's difficult to break. It's important to remember that this isn't your fault. It's a function of how your brain and body communicate. Simply knowing that your heightened response has a biological basis can be relieving. You're not broken. You're wired in a way that requires care and awareness. Despite popular myths, a strong mind does not cause depression. Large population studies show that people with higher intelligence do not have a greater risk of mood disorders compared with those of average intelligence. In fact, they often have lower rates of certain conditions like post-traumatic stress disorder and generalized anxiety. Brain power can act as a protective factor, perhaps because of the cognitive reserve that allows you to adapt and manage stress. What it doesn't protect against, however, are the habits and patterns that accompany how a mind is expressed. Overthinking, perfectionism, and social isolation are not inevitable, but they are common among analytical people. Recognizing them as patterns, not as who you are, creates space for change. It also dispels the damaging myth of the mad genius. Throughout history, stories of creative geniuses battling madness have captured our imaginations, but they are a tiny subset of a vast population. The base rate fallacy makes us remember the dramatic cases while forgetting the many thoughtful people who live balanced, contented lives. This awareness can free you from the stereotype that your mental gifts are destined to come with suffering. Sometimes the weight of intelligence has less to do with brain wiring and more to do with cultural narratives. Our society often equates worth with productivity and knowledge with superiority. From early schooling, those labeled smart are rewarded for correct answers and high scores. Over time, identity can become entangled with achievement. You might believe you are valuable because of what you know or what you produce. When something doesn't go as planned, your sense of self is shaken. Philosophical traditions remind us that this is a precarious foundation. Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Your mind, with its capacity for vivid images and complex scenarios, can conjure sufferings that have not yet and may never occur. Buddhist teachings speak of the second arrow, the pain we inflict on ourselves by how we interpret events. The first arrow is life's unavoidable pain. The second is our reaction. An intelligent mind can shoot many second arrows, weaving stories of failure and rejection that become heavy burdens. Recognizing the difference between what is happening and what your mind is telling you about it can create space for relief. Carl Jung spoke of integrating the shadow, the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore, in order to become whole. For someone who prides themselves on their intellect, the shadow might be the vulnerability of not knowing, the fear of mediocrity, or the need for support. Letting yourself be seen in these areas can be deeply uncomfortable, but it also opens the door to genuine connection. Viktor Frankl, who endured unimaginable suffering and wrote about finding meaning, observed that our deepest freedom lies in how we choose our attitude in any given circumstance. A quick mind gives us tools, but meaning comes from something deeper, the ways we relate to ourselves, others, and the world. Lao Tzu wrote, "He who knows others is wise. He who knows himself is enlightened." True mastery involves turning your keen mind inward, not to criticize, but to understand. It involves recognizing patterns of thought without being trapped by them, feeling emotions without being consumed by them, and allowing yourself the softness of human imperfection. Here's the surprising twist. What if the very qualities that make life feel heavy also carry the seeds of your healing? Your ability to perceive nuance can become the foundation for deep empathy. The same mind that ruminates can learn to observe thoughts without judgment. Your sensitivity can be channeled into creativity, fostering art, music, writing, or connection with nature. Imagine using your analytical skills to dissect your own perfectionism, seeing it as a strategy you learned rather than a truth about who you are. When you unravel the story that your worth depends on constant achievement, you make room for a kinder narrative. Consider that the traits that once seemed to distance you from others, your curiosity, your complexity, can actually be bridges. When you share your struggles with someone you trust, you may discover that people relate more to your humanity than to your accomplishments. Your intelligence becomes a tool to deconstruct old beliefs and build new ones that serve your well-being. Practically speaking, how do you begin to shift these patterns? Start by cultivating awareness of your thoughts without getting lost in them. When you notice your mind racing through possibilities, gently label it as thinking and return to the present moment. Mindfulness practices like focusing on your breath or observing your senses can help ground you. You don't need to stop thinking. Rather, you're learning to watch your thoughts with curiosity instead of being driven by them. If you struggle with perfectionism, experiment with setting smaller, achievable goals. Break tasks down into steps and allow yourself to celebrate incremental progress. When you catch yourself comparing your work to an ideal, pause and recognize the comparison as a mental habit rather than a truth. Journaling can be a powerful ally. Write down the standards you hold yourself to and question their origin. Are they yours? Or did you inherit them from expectations placed upon you? Ask yourself what would happen if you embraced good enough in some areas to make room for rest and joy. Because loneliness often fuels depression, seek out communities where you feel seen. This might mean joining a book club, attending workshops, or connecting with people who share your interests. It might also mean allowing yourself to be vulnerable with a close friend, sharing not only your accomplishments but also your doubts. Remember that genuine connection requires authenticity, and authenticity includes admitting when you don't know, when you're tired, or when you're hurting. If the people around you don't understand the intensity of your experience, consider finding a support group or a therapist familiar with giftedness. Professional support is not a sign of weakness. It's a step toward aligning your internal world with your external life. Therapists can help you differentiate between the patterns that serve you and those that harm you, offering tools tailored to how your mind works. Build rituals that honor your sensitivity. Spend time in nature, where the complexity of the world meets you with beauty rather than demands. Engage in creative activities, painting, playing music, writing, or even cooking, that allow your mind to wander in ways that soothe rather than agitate. Physical activity, whether gentle yoga or brisk walking, can help release the physiological tension that accompanies overexcitability. When you move your body, you give your nervous system an outlet for the energy it accumulates. Practice self-compassion by talking to yourself as you would to a dear friend. When you notice self-criticism, counter it with understanding. Of course I'm feeling pressure. I've been carrying heavy expectations. Allow yourself rest without justifying it with productivity. Rest is not a reward, it's a necessity. Finally, consider the idea that your intelligence is part of you, but not the whole of you. Your worth is not measured by your IQ or your achievements, but by your existence, your capacity to feel, to connect, to grow. Imagine standing once again in that crowded room, your mind attuned to every detail and feeling at peace within yourself. You still notice the small flickers of expression, but instead of analyzing them for hidden danger, you see them as part of the tapestry of human interaction. You allow yourself to laugh, even if the joke doesn't satisfy your intellectual taste, because the laughter connects you to others. You listen without needing to have all the answers, and you speak without fear of being misunderstood. You accept that sometimes you will overthink, sometimes you will feel deeply, and that none of this diminishes you. You're not broken or doomed by your intelligence. You're a complex human being with unique strengths and challenges. In the soft light of dawn, take a gentle breath and let yourself recall the initial feeling of being behind glass. See how that pain begins to dissolve when you allow your mind and heart to work together instead of against each other. You're not merely the sum of your thoughts or accomplishments. You're a living story, unfolding with each moment. The surprising truth is that your mind, with all its brilliance and its burdens, can be a source of profound compassion for yourself and for others. Allow yourself the grace to be imperfect, the courage to seek connection, and the wisdom to know that intelligence, when married to kindness, becomes a source of light rather than weight. In that merging of intellect and humanity, you may discover that the rarest thing is not happiness in intelligent people, but the moment when a brilliant mind learns to rest in its own heart.